Morning guys. Good to see you. So, Payments Association has tasked us to speak with a range of stakeholders. Who are likely to be impacted by the forthcoming PSR regulations in October.
We need to understand how is this going to affect the payments industry. Is the new regulation going to be effective in protecting consumers, and ultimately will it reduce fraud?
So I think there's a number of people we need to see, and I think they might be pretty much attached to some of the key elements. So the first one, we know that only UK banks and senders are affected, and they've got to be sending money to another UK account. A customer needs to report a claim. Now that claimant must have been tricked under false pretenses. Yeah. The bank has to reimburse within 5 days, unless they are waiting for further evidence.
I guess point 4 then is that it's reimbursement is now split 50-50 between sender and receiver.
Lots of semantics, lots of interpretation, and I'm sure the people we're going to speak to will have a range of views about that. So we need to get out there, get those various opinions, and then come back and have a debrief. By having a wide array of inputs from as many sectors as possible, we can establish a far better understanding of the problems that we face. Dr. Nicola Harding, she's an experienced criminologist and academic who has specialised in understanding the wider aspects of financial crime.
Good morning.
She will consider the traditional perspectives of the industry, victims and wider public. We'll also seek to gain access to those views of the criminals who have been involved with this type of fraud, facilitated by Tony Sales, a fraud and social engineering subject matter expert who was once a fraudster himself. So, with my background of nearly 40 years of working in the law enforcement investigations environment, we should have a good opportunity to help the Payments Association understand the potential threats from the forthcoming regulatory changes.
Okay, so Andy, interestingly, one of the victims who was prepared to come and speak to us on camera as well was Matthew Wright, who is a TV and radio personality. He was caught in a phishing scam. He was waiting for a delivery of something, got that text that we all seem to get these days. It came through and it just hit what was going on in his life right at that time. He filled it in, and before you knew it, he had fraudsters calling him as American Express, then dialed through to him quite quickly. He was defrauded really out of about 75,000, which he was able to capture it quite quickly, but there was a question mark over around 19,000 of it, whether he was going to get it refunded or not.
Let's have a look and see what he says.
It's been one of the most traumatic and humiliating experiences of my life, and that's leaving aside the stress of any of the money. It took me to a very dark place. I don't want to say it in an arrogant way, if I fell for it, you'll fall for it, but I used to essentially we used to do tricks on people in newspapers, and I've seen it from that side, and these people are excellent, absolutely excellent, like dealing with the real thing. And I can see that £19,000 has been taken out of the account. And this is very troubling, so I phoned the bank. This really upset me. She didn't fully know the case, but she nevertheless inferred that because I had willfully given over all the details to the fraudsters, that it may well be that I was being held responsible or culpable. And she said that she told me that this £19,000 payment was subject to a bank investigation. And the way she inferred guilt and that I might not get the money made my mood, which I've already explained was pretty traumatised, well, just dreadful. I mean, I was off the cliff edge at this point.
I think the key for me here is that we must keep the victims at the forefront of everything.
So I think that's what, the whole focus of this PSR regulation is about better outcomes for victims. So let's hear directly from the payment systems regulator and hear what they've got to say.
So we only have 3 statutory objectives. So we're here to promote competition, to enhance innovation, and to protect users of payment systems. We've been working in the PSR on the problem of app scams for quite a long time. We actually received the Which Super complaint way back in September 2016. So we've been on quite a long journey. We're trying to get to a world where actually the fraud landscape, there's proper incentives for firms to really protect victims, to stop fraud from happening. And when it does happen, protect victims, give them their money back. So today, there are some firms you can bank with or send payments with, and you get a very different experience if you are a victim of fraud to others. So, for example, TSB and Nationwide are reimbursing their customers huge, to quite a high percentage, and some firms are not. So helping the consumer to get consistent outcomes today. It's not just about the bank that sends the payment, it's about the bank that receives the payment. And that's why our policy goes 50-50 reimbursement, because we want both sides of that transaction to be equally incentivized. We were quite surprised actually when we started this project, and through the data that we've collected, that actually quite a lot of the time, although a bank might have reimbursed the customer for the fraud, the other bank, the receiving bank, didn't even know that they had a fraudster.
Rightly so, victims' outcomes and experiences are right at the heart of this.
In terms of looking after victims, that sits fairly and squarely with the police. So I went and spoke with our contact at the National Lead Police Force for Fraud, City of London Police.
There are some huge opportunities coming, particularly in relation to the new action fraud replacement that will be coming on soon. So some of those more manual approaches that we've had to take in the past, we'll be able to do at scale in an automated way, working with organisations to take in their financial crime reporting data, turn that into packages for us to act on, but also to improve and speed up our what we would call our prevention messaging or protect messages, so we can be much quicker at identifying trends and changes and much more polished working with partners in terms of getting the impactive messaging out to help the public.
But of course, the people who are also having an eye on this are the criminals. Can you see either individuals or organised crime groups taking advantage of this new scheme?
Yes, absolutely. Whilst we welcome the initiative overall, there's always a risk that criminals will try and exploit a new system that people are unfamiliar with. Any opportunity to commit fraud, people will take it. We see that within the existing system as it stands now. So you would expect that to increase in that scale. But we're very alive to that. The industry is very alive to that. It's down to us to kind of make sure we've got the right processes in place to design that out and prevent that as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely thinking that way. I was able to go out, took a little bit of digging and getting hold of someone, but I was able to go and talk to someone who's actively, involved in crime.
Within strict parameters, Tony is able to communicate with people who are still criminally active to understand what the bad guys might actually be thinking and how they will seek to undermine the financial systems that we all rely upon.
We heard that there's a new thing coming and where they're keeping to guarantee the money back. Now we can go to people before say, look, how much you got in your account? I've got 60,000, 80,000, whatever. If they can be guaranteed they're going to get that money back, why are they not going to let us take it out? They're going to get it back, and they're going to get half or whatever percentage we've agreed for them to get, we took out in the first place.
And do you think it would be easy to recruit people that would do that?
When it starts talking them sort of figures in, of course, people who don't do that stuff are all of a sudden they're interested. People might say, no, I ain't going to do, I'm going to get in trouble. I think, whoa, you're going to get in no trouble. This is what's going to happen. I explain to them exactly what's going to happen. Police won't get involved, because of, I think it's the cross whatever. Anyway, I don't know about it, but police will never get involved for that. They never ever do. Like, the potential of police officers to get involved for it is so very low. Like there is no deterrent.
And he says it, he feels very confident in that there's no deterrent. If you're the way that he's talking about it, is that they would get people that have already got money or they don't have money, they could put it through, put money in the account, and how is that going to look any different to someone who's becoming a victim of fraud? Because they can arm these people with everything that they need to say.
Everybody working together is going to be the only way forward. Partnership working is going to be key.
We've got to think though of the context of where we're at kind of economically as well, that we're talking about this here. Tony and I have done research before, the company has, around illegal lending, where we found that people who haven't previously got involved because they haven't been that, skint, for want of a better word. Yeah. What he's saying is really mirroring what we're seeing in other aspects of fraud and financial crime.
Yeah, I mean, there's another bit that I think, Nick, where we mentioned about what's previously happened before, when it comes to bounce back loans. I mean, if we should just play that a little bit and just see.
During COVID, the government set up a scheme called bounce back loans, was that a theme running through?
Well, I did know people do, yes, yeah. And it was initially getting bank back loans for hundreds of thousands of pounds. Dumbing it, just a few. I know quite a few people who were doing that, and they absolutely hit jackpot. Left the country where they made so much money.
Because they understood that process of what was happening.
Yeah, they knew the whole process, mate.
Is there a comparison between bounce back and what the future looks like within the new regulation stuff, do you think?
This new regulation is probably just as same as bounce back. The way it's now, buying the money out, it's going to bounce back. Because it'll probably end up getting called that. Yeah. To be fair, that's what it will probably be. Do you want to get a bounce back?
Wow.
Yeah, so I wanted to check, because I remember what Warren Atkinson, who's the former head of economic crime in the Northwest, told me previously before around bounce back loans. So I'll just show you this clip, and it's quite interesting.
My team, when I was still working within economic crime, were working to support a significant murder investigation. And there were 17 people that we wanted to look at, and every single one of them had a bounce back. Fraudsters are generally right there on the start line, aren't they, in relation to any new sort of ideas. It's just a license to print money, isn't it, for an intelligent criminal?
The crux of it really is we want to reimburse actual victims of fraud, but we want to make sure that they are actual victims of fraud, and that's the challenge for the industry, isn't it? So I went and spoke to various people. One of them was Jane G, who's a subject matter expert in the space with a background, a legal background, to really try and get to the bottom of how does this regulation affect the industry.
When we're not told what ordinary screening of everyday customers really has to involve, we're told what we shouldn't do, and we're told, but we're not told exactly what we should do. What should have come first should have been some standards, should have been where are your sources, for example, of real-time data? Because if you don't have real-time data, we know from reports in the past that many of the providers are giving data which is out of date or incomplete. So how can you determine, for example, is there a network that this entity or this person is part of? Remember, when we're talking fintechs, we're talking a lot of different sized companies. Without a proper data sharing platform, that you're putting a lot of companies at a massive disadvantage. And I think the PSR had very good intentions by doing what they've done, but I think unfortunately they haven't thought about the position of those smaller companies. They've thought they will be okay because we're forcing them to have better controls. They don't say what the better controls are, so there's no prescription on what those controls should be. And of course, they've also not realised that they will be getting criminals who will be thinking about how can we exploit this new legislation. Criminals are better at exploiting technology and legislation than the good guys are, and that's a pity, isn't it?
These things take effort, and I guess the PSR is pushing financial institutions into having to do this now, but it is going to come at a cost, and who's going to pick up the bill? That's something that I then spoke to Hugo Remy, who's the CEO of Cardac. So Cardac are an issuer and acquirer, but they really represent some of the voices of the smaller kind of fintechs and not necessarily the big tier ones in this. They're a bit of a voice for the Davids in this kind of David and Goliath thing of our banking institutions here in the UK. As a smaller company going to speak to the larger kind of banks and financial institutions about particular cases, you know, what's big to you might be quite small to them. So to be able to have that discussion and investigate together or whatever is not facilitated at the moment. Do you think that prior to these regulations coming out, that system should have been set up to facilitate that happening?
Definitely yes, definitely yes. Everyone needs to sit down and discuss those mechanisms, how the cases could be controlled, by whom, who, for example, will identify those cases like it's a criminal case, it's a fraud, and grounds protection. There should be some separate government entity and body. It's definitely not police or someone else. And government will need then to allocate resources for this, find a budget, hire people, educate them.
So Hugo makes the point that quite a lot of these smaller fintechs and up-and-coming financial institutions could well go out of business because of this regulation and the financial burden. So I went and put that back to the PSR. Let's have a look what she says. So some people are saying that this is going to kill off a whole section of fintechs. How would the regulator respond to that?
So we're a competition regulator, so we are a big fan of competition. We think competition is really important, but we think competition needs to go hand in hand with protection for consumers. And competition at any cost is not going to be right for the UK. So we think this is a really important balance. We do agree it's really important the UK has a vibrant payments landscape, that it's got innovation thriving, but it's also important that we protect the users of payment systems at the same time, and we don't let the competition unfettered mean that we get more and more victims of fraud.
I think it comes back to what we've seen in testing, in all the things that we've come across, is that there's been a serious lack of fraud prevention by design in some of these innovative areas. And, you know, just to kind of say that maybe this is what's been needed to really force that innovation puts fraud prevention right at the heart of its processes.
I think anything that puts fraud prevention at its heart is a great thing. I just don't think we should ever do that without understanding it from the criminal perspective, which is extremely difficult.
So what I did then was I took what Tony had found, I took a little, snippet from that interview, and I showed it to the PSR to see, is this something they'd already thought about? Like, what was their perspective on it? So I can show you what they said.
I'll be interested to see what that is.
You can go to people for say, look, how much I've got in your account? I've got 60,000, 80,000 more. If they can be guaranteed that they get that money back, why are they not going to take it out? They're going to get it back. And they're going to get half or whatever percentage we've agreed for them to get, we took out in the first days.
And do you think it would be easy to recruit people that would do that?
When they start talking them sort of figures in, of course, people who don't do that stuff are all of a sudden they're interested.
Do you want my reaction to that?
Yeah, please do share what you think.
So I think what that particular fraudster is talking about is persuading people to be complicit in fraud. And I think we need to be super clear here, that is fraud. So anybody who is complicit and helping a fraudster, just because they think they're gonna be able to get their money back or they're gonna get some return on it, that is a crime. And we would not expect reimbursement to happen in that place. It is very clearly outside of the parameters of our policy.
But it's a challenge that the banks need to meet, right? Is that their investigations have to kind of take that stance of understanding perhaps what the red flags are, if that's the case.
So if you've got a firm who's had a claim from somebody and they've got reason to suspect, but they don't know, they've got reason to suspect that there might be some collusion or there might be first-party fraud going on, they can use this stop the clock provision, which allows them that additional time that they need to investigate.
So how are they going to know whether it's a genuine person or a fraudster?
I think that's the biggest challenge for industry, isn't it? Is that think about how many faster payments, bank transfers are made, and where you can stop the clock where there's reasonable suspicion. How do you have that reasonable suspicion? Like,
they don't look different; they look the same. How do you differentiate that in the masses of information that they're going to be having when it's coming to this point.
We still don't have a gold standard data set for what fraud is. What we are training AI models on, which we're going to have to rely on AI for a lot of this to help us with detection of suspicion, because we simply cannot do it, at a human level to be real time. What we're training and doing machine learning with is not proven fraud data. It's what we think fraud looks like. So like you said, how do we train those models?
Computers don't commit crime. People do.
Yeah.
We need to understand the people. And to sort this out, what we do now need is some great people supported by some great tech. It's going to be the only way to sort this and any other fraud problem out. We've probably come up with some fairly straightforward sort of agreements and solutions with everyone. So I think at this point, we just need to get our findings back to Ben. But we might actually raise a few questions that are going to need monitoring right throughout the process. So Ben, we've spoken to a wide range of people. Now, the good news is all the stakeholders agree with the premise to adopt the reimbursement scheme is positive.
Okay.
What they have some reservations about, perhaps, is either the parameters or the implementation.
Mm-hmm.
They did raise concerns it can be difficult for the payments companies to restructure both tech and people and to identify and reimburse those fraudulent claims. Lots of people mentioned sharing the right data, both securely and across various sectors. That'll be the key to preventing any fraud, not just APP fraud. Everyone's sold on the idea, they have been for years, but we all know that data sharing is really straightforward, both from a legal and operational perspective, and perhaps that's one of the main concerns. I think what we did here was that the new rules may disproportionately affect some of the smaller companies. They won't have access to the data or perhaps some of the resources of the big players, and they're concerned about the risk and financial burden that could put them potentially out of business. What we found out is that criminals are very aware of the proposed changes. They've planned for them and they're ready to seek to exploit them. They're considering recruiting mules to make fraudulent claims. We know they've done this previously in other areas. This obviously begs the question that what we might actually see as a result of the changes is an increase in fraud, and that'd be concerning in itself.
Very much so. I think actually that validates a lot of what we've been hearing from industry.
It's interesting. So how do you think the PSR might respond?
Look, I think the PSR is listening to the sector. They've already consulted on reducing the reimbursement threshold down to 85,000, and that's before the new rules have actually been implemented. So I think that in itself is very positive. But I have to say, does that address some of the problems that you've raised here? And in reality, a fraudster still sees there as a big opportunity at 85,000 as a reimbursement level.
Yeah, because in the middle of our consultation with various stakeholders, we got the news and I watched it and I thought, yeah, that's probably assuaged some concerns, but the real concern we've been highlighting is that criminal opportunity. Exactly. Will this just increase all of the problems that we have? Yes, of course, it will be more claims, but then how do they deal with those claims? It's probably compounding all of the issues that we've raised as part of it.
I think so, and I've always felt quite firmly that tackling fraud at source is the most powerful way of protecting consumers and ensuring that they don't fall foul of these kind of scams. And at the moment, there is still no legislation that involves big tech or social media platforms where, let's face it, a lot of this fraud is currently originating. So again, there's a gap there. As
we always find with these things, you get perspective, things slightly change, and then you start thinking about a number of other things. Agreed. But certainly a good basis for further discussion.
Hugely so, and the Payments Association will continue to work with the PSR as we share these concerns and these identified unintended consequences. But let's stay in touch, and I really appreciate your support.
Yeah, thanks for the offer.